squish it around with a little bit of whatever soap you happen to have around, and you squish it out, you rinse it, and you hang it, and you dry it, and yay, I've got some new yarn. I've taken that process and completely obsessed over it and made it so complicated. But it is an amazing thing what you can do in the process of finishing yarn. You can completely change the nature of your yarn, um, sometimes for good, and that's, it's like throwing a sweater in the washer. If you meant to do that, it's a wonderful thing when the sweater comes out teeny tiny and really thick. If you did not mean to do that, it was a horrible thing. And the same with finishing yarn. There are techniques in every little step that can change the nature of your yarn. And if you look in books about finishing your yarns, I've looked through several books that I own, and so this nice thick book on compendiums of spinning knowledge, and they spend maybe 2 pages on finishing your yarn. They don't get into all the different little things that you can do to enhance your yarn for your particular fiber or project. So that's my intro. I'm going to talk about all those little details that you can do to change your yarn and improve it for the project that you want to use it for. Um, Also, I discovered, I never really thought about it until I got out on Facebook, on the spinning groups on Facebook. And oh my gosh, the flame wars. Do you put a weight on your yarn when you're drying it? And oh, the arguments and the fury that comes up when, oh, never wait it. Oh, you must wait it. It will be horrible if you don't wait it. It'll be curly. Um, yeah, that's evil. I don't know.
Oh,
That's kind of what we're doing when we make yarn is we're twisting it to make it curly. So anyway, that's when I figured out that wow, there's a lot you can do. You can, in the washing process, using hot water versus cold water, using, what kind of soap do you use? Oh my gosh, the flame wars over soap. Um, the agitation. Do you want to full it or do you not want to full it? Do you want to snap it or do you want to thwack it? Yeah, those are real words. Those are real terms. Again, thwacking, big controversies. Um, and drying it. Okay, you hang it on a hanger or you hang it over a rod somewhere. Um, and then, like I mentioned before, waiting. Oh, do you hang a weight on it while it's drying? And then, even after that, do you restain it? Do you measure it before or after you wash it? How do you store it? And then most of us are, a lot of us are weavers. So do you want to use sizing? So many people think I can't use my hand spun on my loom. And I'm sorry, but for many, many centuries, that's all you had. And we have some beautiful fabrics. And people say, oh, well, you can use your hand spun, but only in the weft. Um, or you can use your hand spun, but you have to ply it if you want to use it in the warp. I'm sorry, but for many centuries, they used singles as warp. They figured something out, right? So I've got some secrets. One of those secrets is sizing. And if we don't get to that, because I know it's getting kind of late, um, then I can bring that up at another time. But so the first step, before throwing it in a sink of water, uh, figure out what kind of fiber you're spinning. If it's crimpy wool or fur, that's going to be processed a little differently than non-crimpy wool or fur. Cotton or flax or silk or hemp, um, you can agitate that all you want and it's not going to shrink. So blends that, if you've blended flax with crimpy wool. That's going to give you a whole different aspect. So be conscious of what kind of fiber you have. Your yarn, is it thick? Is it thin? Is it thick and thin? Is it very fragile? Then you're going to have to be very gentle with it. If it's thick and well spun, then you can agitate it all you want, depending on what result you want. If it's novelty yarn, there are certain techniques that you could use if you really don't you put all that effort to put feathers or locks into your yarn, and then do you really want to dunk it in a pot of hot water? Or if you've hand dyed it and maybe it's going to bleed, you might want to use cold water instead. So think of those things. Your yarn is going to help determine what kind of techniques you use. The second step before you dunk it into the water is, what are you going to use it for? That's so critical. If you're going to be fulling your item, like if you're going to use this to knit a purse and then throw it in the washer and dryer to shrink it to make it a nice firm felted purse, that's a great idea. That means also that before you knit it, you're going to wash your yarn very gently so that you don't full it at all. You want it maximum fulling when it's in the washer and dryer. Um, do you want your yarn to be fluffy or do you want it to be smooth? Or if you're spinning worsted, for instance, you probably want that yarn to be pretty smooth. And smooth and thin is the worsted techniques, and um, part of the worsted techniques. And you're not going to go to all the trouble of combing the fiber and then spinning the worsted method to then make it fluffy and soft. So that's something to consider. If you want it fluffy, then that means you might want to do that thwacking that I'll get into later, because that's what thwacking does, is make your yarn nice and fluffy. Are you going to use it as a single? Then even if you're going to use it as a single for warp for your loom or for knitting, then you're going to want to full it just a little bit. I should probably define fulling. We probably all know what this means. Felting is when you take the flat fibers, the carded fibers, and you layer them on top of each other. And like for our pictures, we're using the plain fiber. We're not using the yarn. And then you use the hot soapy water and agitation to felt those fibers together. Fulling is when the yarn, you turn those fibers into yarn and then make a fabric, and then you do that same felting thing. But it is a fabric, it's not the loose fiber. So I'm going to use fulling, but you can always translate that in your head to felting. Um, let's see. If it's going to be used for warp, then you're probably going to want to full it a little bit more. You're going to use more agitation, more hot water, hot and cold water, to full that fiber to make sure that it holds together during the agitation of weaving. If you want to improve your washability, then you might want to wash your yarn the same way that you plan to wash the item that you're going to make with it. If you don't want your item to shrink, then you want to pre-shrink your yarn as much as you can. If you do want, well, I already talked about if you want it to shrink. If you don't have any idea what it's going to be, which is 90% of the time for me, then just wash it as gently as you want. You can always wash it and full it later if you decide to use it for a project where it needs to be fulled. Okay, the first step is to put it into a skein. And I think we all know how to do that. We wind it onto a niddy noddy, or we wind it around, wrap it around a book or the back of a chair to make a lovely skein. Usually our skeins are nice and big. The important thing before you wash it is to put ties on it. At least four for what I would say like a 2 yard skein. Yeah, 2 yard skein. Um, to put at least four ties. Whoops, there we go. And these ties aren't just wrapped around the whole bundle of yarn. Make sure that you do like a figure eight. So let's see if I can find that in there. There we go. So you take your yarn and your tying yarn and wrap it around through the middle, wrap it back around and back through the middle again, and then tie it at the top. So that little figure eight all around your skein is going to help keep your yarn nice and sorted. I'm going to switch to a smaller skein that's easier to see. So this is a small skein that I've made. Whoops, to give you some proportion, this is only maybe a yard, maybe foot and a half. um, I still put four ties on it because yeah, that's my minimum number of ties. If I put three ties or less, then I will it when I wash it, all these yarns will jumble together, and it gets really hard to sort them out. Okay, so now that we've got our skein, we've got it tied. Now we get ready to dunk it into the sink. So the first thing you want to consider is the temperature of your water. Um, and you want to plan on soaking your yarn for at least 30 minutes. This allows that water to penetrate into the twistiest parts of the yarn. Um, the water is going to reactivate that twist. If you have, when you're making your yarn, you've carded it, you've combed it, you've stretched out those fibers, you've taken some of that crimp out, and uh, so when you make your yarn, that crimp is going to stay out until you put it back in the water, and that's going to reactivate that twist. So your final yarn is going to look maybe completely different from your initial yarn just by putting it in any temperature water. Um, if you want to full it, then you're going to use hot water and then rinse it in cold water. If you don't want to full it, never go from hot to cold. If you want it to be, a nice, loose, soft yarn that's not fulled at all, hot to cold will cause your yarn to full and puff up. So that's the no. It's don't go from hot to yarn unless you have a reason to do so. Um, Now, there's also a method called steaming, and I'm just learning about this. I haven't done it. Um, some people, if they have a very fragile yarn, or if it's an art yarn with all those coils or locks or feathers spun in it, you can steam your yarn. Now, my initial thought is I've seen the water where I wash my yarn, even if I've washed the fiber beforehand. Just the processing of it, your hand oils get on it, dirt gets on it. So that first bath is pretty dirty. And so if I steam the yarn, that dirt stays in there. So I'm not a huge fan, but uh, there are some reasons for doing it. And one is if you have a very fragile yarn that you don't want to go through the process of the washing and the snapping and the thwacking and all that stuff. So it's very, very gentle to your yarn. It doesn't wash out any of the oils, but on the flip side, your colors don't run. So if you have very interesting colors that may or may not run and mix, then that's not going to happen with steaming. It dries faster. So if you really, really want to start your project, steaming might be a good idea. The water gets into the fabric or into the yarns um, pretty fast, um, but it doesn't allow for that twist to even out. when it's floating in the water, the twist will, kind of move around into your yarn, and so it'll kind of even the twist out. And then, what do I mean by steaming? So first, get long tongs and really good oven mitts, because you don't want to steam your hand. One method of steaming is to hang your fiber just on a hanger or doorknob or something, and then use a hand steamer, like you use for steaming wrinkles out of your fabrics. Just steam it with your hand steamer for 5 or 10 minutes, and you will be amazed at what it does with your fiber, with your yarns. Um, you can put some water in the bottom of a pot and then put a colander in or a steamer basket. Now, some people will actually put the yarn in the steamer basket and then put the lid on and steam it for 5 or 10 minutes. Um, some people will just put this basket in just in case your yarn falls down, and sort of hold the yarn over top of the pot and sort of move it back and forth and let it steam from the pot. Turn your yarn every now and then because the edges won't get steamed all the time. Another way is to hang your yarn and use an iron, not pressing on it, but to use the steam squirter on your iron and just make sure you have a very good strong thumb. Takes a lot of squirts. um, some people have done it over the spout of a kettle. I think that would take an immense amount of time, and you might as well wash it. Okay, so now, but if you do wash it, now the temperature we already talked about. Now, one thing about if you use hot water to wash your yarn initially, make sure that when you go to rinse your yarn, that the rinse water is the same temperature as the cooled wash water. Now, I have done it before where, I use my hot water on my faucet, the hottest water that comes out, and I let it soak. I let it sit for 30 minutes, and then I use the hot water again. But if you use the hot water again, you have changed the temperature, and it's going to cause just a little bit of fulling. So you want to make it to be the temperature that the wash water has cooled down to. So you'll use your hot water from the tap, add a little cold water, make sure the temperatures are the same, and then put it into the rinse bath. So that's just a little tip. Hot water will get more grease and oils out, but it might cause more bleeding of color. If you're not really sure about the color, about the dyes on that particular yarn, you might want to stick with washing it in cold water. If you wash it in hot water, I got this tip from a very good friend of mine, Miss Cindy. Keep a bottle of vinegar nearby, and if you put it into that hot water and you see the color start to run, then you can immediately put a couple of glugs of vinegar in, and that will help that water, that dye, from running. Don't leave it. Don't think, oh well, it's just it's in the pantry. I'll get it if I need it. That'll be too late. Keep it handy. Keep it right at the sink, at the ready. Okay, now we're hitting one of the really controversial parts of this presentation. What soap do you use? Oh my goodness, you would not believe the flame wars over this. I have always, years and years ago, when I was first a brand new baby spinner, I went to a class by Judith McKenzie. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with her, but she is one of the movers and shakers in the hand spinners world. And she's also a very educated woman. And she has worked with, at that point in time, had worked with some chemists and figured out of all of the different types of soaps that are out there. There's all the wool soaps that are particularly designed for washing wool straight from the sheep, like Eucalan or Kookaburra or Unicorn or Orvis paste. It's designed to wash wool fibers, sometimes right on the sheep. Um, she tested things like dishwasher, yeah, dishwashing detergents, not the kind you put in your dishwasher, but the hand dishwashing detergents like Dawn, like Joy, like you know, just the over-the-counter stuff. And they tested shampoos and such. And at that time, she said that the soap that caused the least damage to the fibers was Dawn hand dishwashing detergent. Wow, that just saved me a ton of money. It's cheap. It's easy. They use it to wash the little critters that get in oil slicks. It's very, very gentle.
Yeah.
However, Dawn has improved their recipe, and it now has enzymes and all sorts of interesting stuff. So I can no longer recommend Dawn because it will now cause some damage to your fibers. These enzymes, these optical brighteners, or that they damage the fibers. So what do I use? I have a really old bottle of Dawn,
Yeah.
and so that's what I use right now. I have purchased Unicorn, but I also use shampoos. If I'm giving something to somebody else, I'll use shampoos. It is designed for hair. Sheep have hair. It's protein fiber. And if you can, I use Pert shampoo, which has the shampoo and conditioner in it, and so it makes your yarn just a little bit softer. So that's a really good option is shampoo. Make sure you like the smell of it. Um, Sometimes I'll use a separate conditioner if I have a really coarse yarn. Do not use dish soaps. They have all sorts of weird enzymes in it. Even my favorite, Dawn. I'm still in mourning over that. Clothes detergents. No! Please don't use clothes detergents. Um, they have enzymes, they have bleaches, they have optical brighteners, they have whiteners, they have biological surfactants that are designed to go after protein, which is what wool is made of. So, if you do it once or twice, that's okay. But if to be safe, I would go with the shampoos. I would go with the wool washes, the Unicorn, the Eucalan, the Orvis paste type soaps. Um, some people say that wool fibers, the wool and fur fibers, the protein fibers, really like a splash of vinegar in the last rinse. It evens out that pH to match the pH of the fiber. I've never tried that, but that's an experiment coming up. Now, cotton or flax or hemp, um, Stephanie Gustad has a huge recipe. Her emphasis is that it needs to be boiled to remove the wax. Cotton has a wax on the outside. Flax and hemp has a wax on the outside. Especially if you plan on dyeing it later, you need to remove that wax. It will make the fabric softer. If you want the fabric to be stiffer, hey, don't boil it. Leave that wax in there, and you'll get a nice stiff fabric. So there's a long recipe. I will put that in the notes. Um, I will put an addendum, but she's using dry a tablespoon of simple dry detergent with no enzymes, fluorescent dyes, bleach, or whiteners, 2 tablespoons of washing soda. I don't even know where you get washing soda.
Dharma Trading Company.
Where?
Dharma. Trading
Pharma?
Company. Yeah.
Actually, almost
Kroger.
like grocery
Kroger.
areas.
Kroger or
Cool.
Walmart.
Okay.
Oh, good to know. I've never looked for it.
I buy large boxes of it at the grocery store or Ace Hardware or whatever for preparing, for dyeing.
Nice. Oh, that's right. That's right. You do use washing soda and dyeing. Excellent. Good to know. Thank you. Now, once your yarn is in your soapy water, what do you do now? I usually don't have a purpose for my yarn yet. I usually spin yarn because I want to use that fiber. I fall in love with the fiber. I like to see what the fiber will do in a yarn. So I rarely have a project. So I'm going to process my yarn very gently. I'm going to use cool water. I'm going to use very little agitation. I'm going to let it float in that water for at least a half an hour to get the full crimpiness of the yarn, of the fiber back into the yarn. But agitation can dramatically change your yarn texture. If you want to full it, you can. If you want to use your warp yarn for warp, you'll probably want to full it at least a little bit. Judith Ann McKenzie, again, one of my heroes. She actually takes her yarn and puts it in her soapy water, and she takes a little kitchen plunger, that has a little rubber plunger, and she plunges it, and then she puts it into cold water, and she plunges it, and puts it back and plunges it. I'm thinking this stuff is gonna shrink like mad, but I bet you it'll never pull apart in your warp. So there is a middle ground. Maybe plunge just a little bit, maybe squish it a little bit. Maybe instead of using agitation, go back and forth between hot and cold, because that will shock the yarn and cause it to shrink a little bit without doing a lot of agitation. So you have a wide range of options here. To not do any agitation at all the way up to Judith Ann McKenzie. So cotton, flax, and hemp, don't bother. It's not going to shrink that much. It might shrink a tiny bit, but it doesn't benefit from agitation. On the good side, it probably won't hurt it much either. It just won't change it too much. Now, yarn spun woolen, you're probably going to want to agitate it at least a little tiny bit, because that will cause those woolen yarns are spun with a lot of crimpy, loose twirls inside. And if you agitate it a little bit, those little fibers will start to spread out and make your yarn nice and fluffy. It'll full it just a tiny bit. Or you can not do that at all and wait until the thwacking stage. Worsted yarn, that's the ones that you're spinning long parallel fibers to get a nice smooth yarn. You don't want to agitate that at all if you want to keep it nice and smooth. So once you've done your agitation, then you move it into your rinse buckets, making sure that this temperature is the same if you don't want to do any fulling, or it can be in hot or it can be in cold. It all depends on your fiber. So once you've washed and rinsed it, remove the excess water. So you're going to squeeze it. I wouldn't recommend twisting it. Now, when I wash my, let me use a little one. When I wash my yarn, I wash it in the skein. Now, we often then twist that skein when we're transporting it, and then put one loop in the other loop, and you have that little nice little skein package, I guess you'd call it. Sometimes if I have a delicate yarn, I will wash it in the skein package, but usually I will wash it when it's all completely loose. It allows that water to get in easier. But so now you've washed it, you've rinsed it, you've squeezed all of the water out of your yarn. Um, and you'll find that, oh my gosh, it looks horrible. All the threads are all short and long and caught in something, and oh, it's terrible. So after you've squeezed the water out, use those ties and put your hands in the middle of that yarn. And this is called snapping. Just snap, snap, snap. And move that yarn around a little bit. Snap, snap, snap. Move that yarn around a little bit. Snap, snap, snap. And look how nice it gets. Yay! Your yarn is saved. So that's very helpful. No controversy over that. If your yarn's very thin, snap it very gently. Let's see, that's it. Wow, I wrote a whole page on that. It's a whole lot easier to show it than it is to write it. Now comes the really controversial part, thwacking. So thwacking is when you take your skein of yarn and you've been very gentle and you've washed it, but you want to full it just a little bit. You want it to bloom and get a fuzzy surface on it to make your fabric nice and fuzzy. So how do you do that at this point? So you take your skein of yarn, grab one end, nice and tight, and then the other end, you'll find a nice, clean, smooth counter, and thwack, 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 thwack. Now this is still wet. It gets a lot of aggression out. It's a lot of fun. Now turn it a little bit, grab the end, thwack, 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 thwack. Turn it a little bit, grab the end, thwack, thwack, thwack. This will cause the yarn to fluff up. It'll get thicker in diameter. It'll cause little fuzzies to appear on the surface. And it's wonderful if you want those effects. Much controversy over this. To me, it's very simple. If you want a fluffy, soft, thicker yarn, then thwack it. If you don't, then don't thwack it. Easy peasy. It's an option. It's not a rule. So that's, I'm always amazed at how many people on the internet get so stressed out about this. If you want it, do it. If you don't, don't. Now, drying. No, that's easy, right? You just hang it from a hanger or drape it over a rod or something. But this is the second huge controversy, waiting. So this yarn, for instance, let's go back to the little one. Too hard to see. So sometimes you'll take it, you've washed it, you've thwacked it, and your yarn is all twisty curly because maybe you put too much twist in it when you were plying, or not enough twist in it when you were spinning it. And so it's twisty curly, or maybe it's got all those little bitty pigtails in it because it has too much twist. Can you fix it by hanging a weight on it? Yes, but you will only be fixing your yarn. Once you have that nice fixed yarn and it's nice and straight, and you go to knit it into a garment or into some fabric, and then you wash it, guess what? All that twist is going to come back. And instead of having twisties in your yarn, you're going to have a skewed fabric. You're going to have little pigtails pop up. So That's the big controversy. Some people say they always put a weight on it. Some people say never put a weight on it. Well, there is one, to me, there's one really good reason to put a weight on it. I have made a yarn where I put lots and lots of twist into it. When it hung, it was so tight when it hung. I did it on purpose because I wanted to make an elastic fabric. So in order to then make that fabric, I put a weight on it just enough to stretch the fiber out, but not too much. If you put a whole lot on that yarn, it might block it, which means that you take that twist out, you damage the fibers, and that twist never coming back. But if you put just enough to make it straight, then it'll be easy to knit with. And what I did with that yarn was I used it in the wristbands of my gloves and mittens. So then when I washed my gloves and mittens, then that curled up again. I now have an elastic wristband on my gloves and mittens.
Cool.
It was a really cool thing to do, a really cool project. You can use that feature in weaving also. That's how they make seersucker. Or you can make fabrics that have that super twisty yarn to make shrinky parts of your fiber. Oh boy, the technical terms, right? So if I put my over twisted yarn into the center of my warp, then when I go to wash it, that part will shrink up and make ruffles on the edges. A really cool effect if that's what you want. If it isn't what you want, then don't put a weight on it. But the weight will straighten out that fiber long enough for you to warp your loom, and then when you wash it, you'll get these cool ruffles. So there is a reason to use weights, but generally I don't. Some people say, and I could understand this, to put a small towel or a washcloth in the loop of it, just to provide just a little bit of tension. I don't think that would cause any harm. Reasons not to weight: it will throw off your gauge. If you weight your yarn and then you knit it and then you wash it, it will be much smaller than if you didn't use a lot of weight. It will camouflage any over twist. That over twist experiment was really fun, but if you camouflage it and you didn't intend to use an over twisted yarn, then your resulting fabric, when it gets washed, will shrink up or skew, and you'll have to do some real serious blocking, and that blocking will go away and it'll skew again as soon as any humidity hits it. Guess what? We live in Tidewater in Williamsburg. It's always humid. So yeah, 20 minutes out in the air and it's going to skew again. And we already covered reasons why you would weight it. But one reason to weight it and then knit with it, these are some samples of yarns that were knitted to be 3D. Let's see if I can turn this. So one of the samples is the flat, and the other is using different patterns of knitting. And then when you wash that over-energized singles fabric, you'll get a 3D effect. It's so fun to play with. So what's next? So now it's dry, with or without your weight. It's finally dried. Oh, by the way, you probably want to turn it every now and then as it's drying. I'll hang it on a hanger, and then I'll come in and turn it every now and then, so you don't get one big crease at the top of the hanger. I would reskein your yarn as soon as you can after it's dry, just to make sure that you haven't felted all those yarns together and to give you an opportunity to pull them apart. It might feel like it's all been pulled apart, but behind those ties, you might have little felted parts. This is a good time to measure your yarn. If you measure your yarn before you wash it, you will not get an accurate result. If you measure your yarn after you wash it, because then it has already done its shrinking. And that'll give you a good number to label it for your project. You'll know how much yarn you have. If you're going to use that yarn right away, then go ahead and put it into a ball. But if you're not going to use it right away, I would recommend storing it as a skein. It will keep that yarn nice and relaxed. So it's 12:15. Do y'all want to hear a little bit about sizing? Okay, because most of us are, well, a lot of us are weavers. And so if you want to use your yarn as part of your warp, then, and maybe you don't want to felt it a whole lot, then you can size it. And what that means is to take your yarn and put it into a sizing bath. That bath can be made out of my favorite is gelatin. You take the Knox blocks or the Knox gelatin packets, the unflavored gelatin. Take 2 envelopes. It comes in a pack of 4, and mix it in a half a cup of cold water, and stir it really fast. Do not pour it in, wander over, and come back, because you'll have what I saw referred to as yarn boogers. Yeah. So pour it in, stir it really fast, really quickly, mix thoroughly, then pour that into a pot with 2 cups of boiling water and stir that really quickly. Let that cool down, and then you can put your dry yarn into that pot and kind of knead it around gently to kind of squish that into the yarn. And then take it out, squish out as much of the loose liquid as you can. At this point, it is not sticky, icky, but once it starts to dry, it gets a little bit sticky. So you'll hang it to dry, turn it every now and then, kind of pull it apart every now and then as it's drying, so it doesn't stick to each other. Some people, if you are lucky enough to have a yarn blocker, this is where you want to use it. Wrap it with saran so this sizing doesn't get on your nice wood yarn blocker. A yarn blocker is like a really big Swift, and you can wrap that yarn around that yarn blocker. It gives you opportunity to squeeze out extra sizing, and then it will dry under tension on that yarn blocker. And that's a cool thing if you have one. I don't know many people who have one, so you instead don't tell anybody, put a little weight on it. Just enough to stretch it out to where it's kind of straight. Not a whole lot. Other recipes for size are one of my favorite authors suggested dried milk. Enough packets of dried milk to make 1 quart, and then mix that into 2 cups of water, and then do the same dunk, and it can be cold water, cool water, and then do the dunking and massaging and the squeezing and the drying. She does say, oh, but after a few days it will smell like sour milk. Ooh, I don't want to work with sour milk. So she highly recommends that. I'm putting it out there, but I'm not going to recommend it myself personally. Some people use flour or cornstarch or laundry starch. You can just buy laundry starch, liquid laundry starch, and use that. Flaxseed mucilage, that sounds gross. But basically you take flaxseed and you simmer or boil it in water, or just soak it overnight, and that water will strain out the flax seeds, and that water will be really slick, and that makes a nice sizing. But the gelatin, and make sure you wash it out in warm water. Some of these will stick. Flour will cook in if you wash it in hot water. But if you do your first rinse with cool or warm, just warm water, um, that'll take it out. It makes it really nice for your warp, especially if you have a fluffy yarn. It helps smooth down those fluffies while you're weaving. So, in conclusion, I have taken the simplest part of hand spinning and I have made it horribly complicated. But it's fun to see what different little things that you do along this simple process can make a huge difference in your yarns. So I hope this is helpful. Gives you a little few more tools to put in your toolbox. Uh, uh, that's what we're all about, is sharing different little tips and tools. Is anybody still out there?
Yes.
I am so impressed. When does your book come out?
Yes.
Are so organized.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes, I have never seen
learned-
anything on this process spelled out that way.
Excellent. You need to write a paper on this and present it to hand spinning or something.
Yeah,
Oh,
really.
should.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, paper
It was
book,
fabulous.
something, because if you're, I don't know where you get this as a new spinner elsewhere.
I've been amazed. Like I said at the beginning, 1 or 2 pages in almost all of the books that I read cover this process, and almost all of them basically say put it in some water and put some soap in, rinse it out, and hang it to dry. And there's so much more to it that you can use, that you can do.
Wow.
So. Yeah, this was fun. This was fun writing this up and doing the research. So I will try to write that. I will probably just do a short summary in the minutes, and I'll write up a separate document that maybe we'll send as an attachment.
Wow,
And
Liz.
That your video is going to have the whole thing.
That's
Yeah.
good to look back on it. I would like to look back on it and listen to it again.
Yeah.
Give me some time, and maybe by dinner time it will be up and easily available for all parties.
Okay.
Liz, can I ask one question?
absolutely.
Let's say that you had some yarn at home and you knew that it would not work on, and it was in this skein kind of thing. Okay, wait one sec. Let's just say I have this, and I know it would not go on my floor loom for my warp because it would break. Could I undo it and then do one of the finishing techniques that you said, or is this already done and could never be redone?
Oh, it can always be. You can't undo fulling, but you can do more fulling. You
Okay,
can always add fulling in. And if the fulling doesn't work, then you can always add sizing, or you can just try sizing. And one little trick is to take your yarn and take a little short piece and let's see, rub that short piece on the edge of a table,
mhm,
just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and see how much it frays.
okay,
And then put a little bit of sizing on it. Laundry starch would work just for a test,
mhm,
and do the abrasion test and see if that's better.
right.
And if that doesn't work, then try another piece and do some fulling on it and do that abrasion test and test it out. Sample, sample, sample. Sometimes I have enough yarn to make a project. Most of my yarn goes
Looks
into
like it.
sampling.
Thank you.
Great, but it's a great idea. Yeah.
Some of those sizing compounds scare me a little bit because they're the sort of things that would attract critters.
Yes. Yes. let's give it back
I
that
need
page.
I-
Yeah,
I-
the flour definitely
I
will
need
attract
ants in
critters.
my kitchen counter. I don't want them in my sweater.
Exactly, exactly. I think um, I think the milk would be the worst. The
Yeah.
flour
Yeah.
or and
Gelatin
various
might be as bad as
starches.
milk. Smell is bad, but it could get ants.
Right, right. But what I was reading is that the gelatin and the flaxseed tend to not attract the critters. Um, I don't know about laundry starch. I don't know what's in laundry starch, uh, but I would imagine that that's, well, I guess you'd have to look at the ingredients. If any of the ingredients look tasty.
Well, okay, think cornstarch, but I think laundry starch may be some other grain, but it's the same idea.
Uh,
But you can do a nice thickener with cornstarch, but it can get, but it's not sweet, so it's probably less likely to get critters than some of the other stuff.
true, true. Good point. Yeah. Excuse me.
Really impressed, Liz.
Mm,
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you.
I hope it wasn't too boring for the non-spinners.
It was
you-
wonderful.
No.
Us weavers
I'm not
need
a
to know some of
spinner.
these
I'm not a
tricks too.
spinner, and I was
Yes.
totally captivated.
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
Yep. A lot of
I
these
thought I was
techniques-
moving too much too.
Nope.
Sorry.
Nope.
Wonderful.
Just the right
I like-
amount.
The flacking. I like the flacking.
See,
Yeah.
Liz, I could imagine this same talk being given by someone who was less animated and talked in a
Yeah.
You put the spirit
everyone
into
would
it,
have
it
left.
makes it interesting. I'm not a spinner, but you put interest into it.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yay.
Wow, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome.
You put a lot of work into that. We appreciate it.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Glad to do it. It was labor of love.
We're lucky to have you. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
We are. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
any
Well,
other
does
questions?
anybody have any questions?